BayRadio International on the second day of 2024. Just coming up to 10 minutes past 5, mainland Spain, 10 minutes past 4 in the UK and the Canaries. Very pleased to welcome back Nick de Bois to the BayRadio studios. How you doing, Nick?
Very well. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to see you. Glad you got your visa renewed.
Yes, and I bought a jacket yesterday, by the way.
I understood.
Been shopping.
And my sources told me.
I've been absolutely, yes, I was served very well. Now, but we've been down here since 28th. It's been absolutely lovely. I got as close to going in the sea on the Arenal as it was ever going to get.
Really? You
yesterday.
didn't go in the end?
I didn't quite go in.
No, you went and bought a coat instead.
I did. I went and bought a coat instead. But it was great. It was a really good scheme, this, where all these very, very happy, mad Englishmen and mad Dutch, a lot of Dutch
plenty,
went running in the sea.
And quite a lot of money raised as well. I saw some
good.
high figures from some individuals on the pub sweep as well. So well done to everybody who took part
really
in those.
Good.
Yeah,
really
right across Spain. People in the sea on New Year's Day. Right, Nick, we're not going to let you get away with it. 2023, when first you said you were going to be here, and I said, well, we could maybe look back at some of the highlights in politics of 2023. Now, specifically Britain. I'm not quite sure that there really are too many highlights for us to look back on.
Well, there were
from a
one
Conservative point of view, certainly not. There are events, but are there highlights?
No, I think what was interesting was for Rishi Sunak, bless him, the Prime Minister, he kind of went into January 23 very boldly setting out his 5 goals, which, I kind of know them off pat now, stop the boats and cut the waiting list, all that stuff, grow the economy.
Which actually came back to bite him again today.
Well, quite a few are biting him, but he went in also hoping to shift the polls. And actually, he started the year pretty much where he's finished the year. So it's been a year of frustration for Conservative strategists. The country as a whole actually got a bit of a fillip in the year, which I know it's easy to overlook. When the ONS has been basically producing figures for a couple of years saying how awful things were, they went, we've made a bit of a mistake.
Yeah.
And actually, you've been one of the fastest growing economies since COVID, and not the others. However, the future forecasts, and these are forecasts, and I remind people that economic forecasters only exist to make astrologists look good, is that basically they are saying it's still tough times. And I think there probably is a very flat line growth in 24, which won't suit Rishi Sunak.
No, it certainly won't. And of course, we'll come to talk about what's going to happen in 2024 shortly. OK, so if you can perhaps come up with some political highlights for Britain, what are they for 2023?
Well, I do think that the recovery has been better than anyone thought, but it's still tough. The good news is at the end of the year, earnings are now higher than inflation, only just. So people will start to think it's worth earning a bit more money now because it's not all been eaten up inflation. The inflation, which was always going to come down, I'm not going to sit here and say that this was all down to the government. It was one of Rishi Sunak's goals to halve inflation by the end of this year. Well, the goal has been achieved. Now, some people say, well, we blame the government when inflation is high, so we're going to give him the credit when it comes down. I think it's a bit rich to give him all the credit, but the fact of the matter is the economy has been saved from the perilous state it was in of their own making at the end of 22, which of course was after Liz Truss. So stabilised the economy. We saw better growth than we actually did. I mean, even on things like the boats, which are, if you take the politics out of the boats, it's people taking their lives in their own hands.
Suella Braverman out of the situation helps.
And take Suella Braverman. Yes, I think we've had quite a few Home Secretaries this year.
We have indeed. I did have the figures somewhere, but yeah.
So even they are reducing. Rwanda has been a complete farce. The Rwanda flights are not going anywhere yet. I actually think he's going to get one off the ground, but I'm not sure how many people are going to be on it. We have actually sent more Home Secretaries to Rwanda than we've actually sent illegal immigrants.
Yeah. Grant Shapps managed to hold down 5 cabinet jobs. That was one of the highlights. I thought that was pretty well.
Yeah, Grant is the eternal survivor. He's now Defence Secretary. And again, I would also say on highlights, when it comes to Ukraine, for example, Britain, whereas I think Europe and America are now wobbling badly because they're struggling to get approval to put financial packages in, the bottom line is the UK has been steadfast, and it has been leading the way in providing both military aid and financial aid to Ukraine.
And training, certainly.
People aren't talking about Ukraine now because of what's going on in Gaza and Israel.
War. I mean, it came back a little bit in the past week or so because of the amount of bombing that's been happening and the tit-for-tat sort of bombing that we've been seeing. But yes, certainly went off the radar quite a bit. But Britain was quite often there to reset that. Certainly from
and trying to shore up the allies. I mean, let's not forget in America, the Joe Biden, right, who I think is now absolutely a loose cannon as president in the States. I don't think he's in control. I think he's lost a lot of his cognitive reasoning. I think there's real problems there. One thing he's managed to be very consistent on is saying we have got to continue to support Ukraine. Ukraine's fight against Russia is our fight. But the Republican Party, for all sorts of reasons, are digging in, encouraged by Trump, not to approve money going in there. Britain's done well on that this year. It's been consistent. But that's huge if you've actually got the leaders of the free world, a European Union whose leaders may want to support it, but many countries are blocking it.
Well, they're struggling. In Germany, the powerhouse of Europe, is under immense strain financially, despite saying that it's going to increase spending on weapons and on its military. But how is it going to do that while it's in the doldrums?
We won't get too technical, but we know that Germany suffered as a result of their constitutional court has really put them into real problems, saying you can't spend money that you're planning to spend on other things. So they're in a real mess now, and the coalition is falling apart, I think, of the Greens and the Social Democrats. So what world are we in when it seems to be okay not to stand behind a nation less than 2,000 miles away from you where Russia is knocking on your doorstep? I mean, it is bonkers, isn't it?
Well, just the way that it fell away from, basically all the consciousness of the world's press because of the Hamas and Israel situation, which looks set to continue right the way through next year. But I don't know what more is going to happen other than what we've been seeing, which is quite extraordinary, the way that the reaction to that initial event
it is. And I mean, you talked about 2023. It's not so long ago, every weekend, and it's still happening, but not to the same extent, we were dominated by people marching in their thousands, not with a word about freeing the hostages, the Israeli hostages, not with a word about the atrocity that actually sparked this whole war, but actually marching on the streets demanding that Israel basically has a ceasefire and backs off their mission to remove Hamas. Now, it was an odd situation to be. It was an odd country to be in, where within a matter of hours, actually, but days certainly, the victims of that horrible attack on the 7th of October were suddenly being held up as those responsible for what happened. And that brought a lot of political difficulties at home. It brought people to the streets that were frankly shouting support for a terrorist organisation, which Hamas are, and certainly in our country and many others. Now, of course, it's moved on hugely because there is real horrors happening in Gaza. We are seeing that on our streets now, and people are absolutely legitimate, I think, in protesting about that. Complaining about that, legitimately about it, but actually to start confusing that with what is basically, and deliberately, by the way, and toxifying it by anti-Semitic behaviour, which we are seeing on streets. It's
huge
just ridiculous.
Rise, not just in Britain, but across the rest of Europe as well, and quite a worrying situation with those demonstrations taking place. It could just spark at any point.
And it did, and we saw it in North London, my old constituency, and next to my old constituency, high Jewish population in Barnet, where an awful lot of things. I was taking calls on my shows that I do over there, where basically Jewish people were saying they're leaving the country. And that takes you back nearly 100 years, doesn't it? This
really
is pretty
does.
horrific stuff.
But going where?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that is a legitimate question.
To Israel?
I said, where would you feel safer? And actually, Israel was the only place they did say that they would feel safer. And of course, they are living with war. So I think that's been a really toxic
certainly has changed the whole fabric of what's been going on, and certainly the West and the Middle Eastern world. Really, the focus, as you say, was Ukraine, and then suddenly just wholesale change.
And we are probably saying now 2023 has probably been one of the most unstable years in world history. Well, guess what? 2024 has the potential to be even less stable, as I'm sure we'll talk about later.
It really does. In 2023, Jeremy Hunt did quite well to hang on to his job, one would have thought.
He did very well.
So you think about it, how many of them? 3 of his 4 predecessors didn't manage a whole year.
Well, Kwasi Kwarteng, of course, disappeared very quickly. He was Liz Truss's chancellor. And Sajid Javid, I think he was out, and he's now Sir Sajid in the latest honours, I think, that have come out. Jeremy Hunt stabilised the ship. I mean, Jeremy's a lovely man, but he's really dull, and that's exactly what you need
for a chancellor.
For a chancellor. By the way, he's good company, if you know what I mean, but he's not an exciting politician. Neither is Rishi Sunak. And that is why their achievement is to stabilise. So the question is the alternative another dull sort of managerial banker, Keir Starmer? And that's what the hot money's on for winning the next election.
Yeah, well, we will come to that. I suppose the most surprising thing in British politics, or one of the most surprising things in British politics, was the return of one David Cameron.
Wow, yes.
Well, that just blew our mind when
no one
happened.
saw that
Nobody
coming.
saw it.
No one saw that coming. Actually, that's not true. One journalist did predict last year that Rishi Sunak would start bringing up ghosts of the past.
Okay.
Now, Cameron was actually a good appointment as Foreign Secretary because, I mean, his phone book is just about every world leader that you want. So he's got credibility. I thought it was really risky for Sunak because, David Cameron's going to shine compared to Rishi Sunak.
And he is that sort of character, isn't he? I mean, as you imagine, you're just mentioning the dull men, but, you know, the Foreign Secretary rising.
He was brilliant. David Cameron was really good at creating a crisis and then stepping in and sorting it out. And it was quite spectacular. And in the House of Commons, when he was on his feet, you couldn't help but admire him. Even when I was pretty grumpy with him, I was going, man, you're a class act. And what he's done rather well here is he's stepped onto the world stage and kept off the domestic stage. Rather well.
Has, hasn't he?
And I think we are, if you think about it, we're pretty bad at using very experienced politicians. We tend to send them off to pastures, either the House of Lords or we never hear from them again, or they go and do a Tony Blair and make a fortune. We tend to shy away from using their advice. I would say this of a political opponent, Gordon Brown. He's turning out some really interesting stuff and ideas at the moment. Former Labour leader. Huge. It was Chancellor for about 11 years.
And worked with Tony Blair for all of that time
Tony
as
Blair.
well.
And yet he doesn't really get a platform to speak. He's always he's out there. But you would argue, is there room for talent like that in a future Labour government? Probably not, because we don't work that way.
There was a debate in our household where we were going like, well, what if, Dave went the whole way and tried to come back as Prime Minister.
It's really hard.
Because it's not happened, although it's not illegal, and somebody who's not a sitting MP can actually be Prime Minister.
The King can appoint anyone he likes as Prime Minister, but it wouldn't last 5 minutes unless you answered to the House of Commons. Mm-hmm. So theoretically, if David Cameron somehow managed to become Conservative Party leader, and the party went to him and rather than have an election said, look, we just want to compromise a sane man for a few months in charge sort of thing. Theoretically, it could happen, but he'd have to have a safe seat. He could not lead from the Lords. It would be pretty...
He would have to have a seat.
He couldn't. You could not in modern day be Prime Minister and hide away in the Lords. So, but there's all sorts of other reasons, by the way, why it's pretty hard to conceive that, not least his wife.
You can't see that happening, though.
No, and I there's a story going around that when his youngest daughter was told that he was going back to become Foreign Secretary, her answer was she sort of threw down her cereal bowl thing and just rolled her eyes at the thought of her father doing all that stuff again. And I just think they've moved on. He stepped in potentially when his country needed him because the world was in such a mess. I'm not talking about domestic politics. And I think it was a smart move.
Good appointment.
Yeah.
All right, Nick de Bois here, talking politics of 2023. We'll be looking ahead to 2024, not just in the UK, but on the wider world stage, which is his brand new remit now. BayRadio International, our good friend Nick de Bois with us this afternoon, looking back on politics in 2023 and ahead to 2024. Let's stick with the UK before we look wider afield after the next break, Nick. So, election this year in Britain, it's got to be, at least by, well, I think the latest it could actually happen would be the January 25th or something eventually next year.
Right, yeah.
So, but we're going to see it earlier, aren't we? Did we not? Why has May been thrown about? It's always a spring election.
Well, I think Sunak's made a big mistake here, and I think he needs to come out now and say it won't be May, because otherwise he'll be accused of bottling it and being a cad if momentum builds up. He can have he's said the election will be in 24, so January's out, right? And it would be stupid to have it in January. My guess is it will be late October, early November, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, his whole strategy, in a nutshell, is he wants people to feel that things are getting better and that he's a competent bloke, right? Well,
he's not doing great in the polls as things stand.
No, and they haven't changed for a year. He's not the sort of risk taker. He's not going to suddenly come out and increase tax thresholds so everyone's not better off and all of that. He's going to do a bit of that. There's going to be tax cuts.
He'll avoid a recession.
Well, he should do. There may be a technical one, but bottom line is he wants people to feel better. He wants them to feel their earnings are going up, that he's getting a grip of things. Why? Because we all know no one's really in love with Keir Starmer. So he wants them to go in the polling booth going, I hate those bloody Tories, but at least you know where you stand with them, right? Okay.
I mean, this would be record-breaking, wouldn't it? Because for this century, there hasn't been, not in the past century, there haven't been 5 terms.
I think only Gladstone got 4 terms when he was Prime Minister. So it would be record-breaking, okay? And that's fundamentally a strategy. To do that, he needs to stay in power as long as possible. And also he likes being Prime Minister, right? So why give it up? 2.5 years is not bad, so hang in there till November. If he goes in May, the reason people are talking about May is because the budget's been brought forward to March, and the idea is, then you'll have a few extra pennies in your. That's nonsense. The budget's been brought forward in March because they want to get as many things in place for as long as possible. So go early March, don't go late March. Quite logical to do that. Theoretically, he could be forced into an election by his own party because they're bonkers. There's 5 different groups.
This is the party of which you are a member.
Still.
You're an MP.
Yeah, just. Yes, I am. It's a very different party. But there's 5 groups on the right wing of the party. They call it 5 families. I mean, blimey, if they're families, it's like, the royals at war.
And they realise what they're doing, do they? Do you think?
Yeah, of course. But you get this collective. Well, they know what they're doing, but they not necessarily understand the impact it's having on the electorate. So they're kind of at war, and they could force them into an election. So the chance, and that will be over, believe it or not, Rwanda, which is like bonkers to why he's invested, Rishi Sunak, so much in getting planes off is beyond me. It's a really important issue. It's probably about 4th most important issue, but it's not the biggest single driver to voting. The economy is how well are you doing? The NHS, which is in a right mess, as we know. And he really is relying on the fact that people will think, things are getting better, right? If he gets forced into a May election, that will be the only reason it's going to happen. He will have bad local election results then, but I suspect they won't be as bad as everyone thinks. And here's a glimmer of hope. Look carefully, and the last month's polls, they have narrowed. So Labour have gone from like 19, 20 points. It's looking more like 16.
What is that
17.
post-party conference era?
No. It's because that was 2 or 3 months ago. So they have narrowed a bit. So he's going to take a little bit of comfort from that. But the real reason he has a narrow course to victory, and I stress narrow, is that no one's in love with Keir Starmer. So at the moment, Keir Starmer's not done anything, and he's popular because he's not the Tories.
I think it's difficult for Labour, isn't it? Because until now, they've got to go into gear and be ready for an election, but not give everything away too early and really time things right.
Which is what they are beginning to do. There's going to be speeches this week, and we've already had, Wed Streeting out talking about health. We've had Rachel Reeves
talking about his book. Then
no, funny enough. He's elsewhere. Rachel Reeves, who's the Chancellor, going around saying, "We're going to do this. We're going to do this."
Who actually looks quite good as Chancellor.
She looks
Chancellor.
She looks
sounds very good.
She looks good and she sounds good. She's absolutely right. Her best buddy is George Osborne, the former Tory Chancellor. But she's gone around and hooked herself to the 3 years, basically, of sticking to the Tory spending plans. So she's got this tension in her own party. They wanted to go and spend more. And she's saying, well, we won't do that unless we get the proceeds of growth. Right? That's the caveat. So that's Rishi's strategy.
But we keep getting these things, don't we, where the Conservatives shoot themselves in the foot. I mean, it's happened again today over the numbers of, the asylum seekers scenario. Well, what's happened there exactly? How did they got that wrong?
You see, Cal, you're making the mistake of being part of the Westminster Village, even tucked out in this bubble out here. Most people will only hear that he's got his backlog done.
Yeah.
Most people are not going to interrogate the figures, apart from your brilliant listeners.
But it's not true.
Well, it is, as ever with these things, it's not a lie.
Statistics.
If you dig deep and scratch, there's a few things that make you go, well, they haven't really, have they? But overall, they will say, haven't we done well? I'm not going to sit here and comment because there's so many holes in what they've claimed. But equally, there's some truth in what they've said. So all that's going to be heard out there is they're getting to grips with this. That's all Rishi Sunak wants. I mean, why he said he's going to stop the boats rather than just reduce the boats. I know it's not as sexy, but stop the boats. It's virtually impossible to do that, right? So he's really dug himself a bit of a hole there.
Okay, right. We'll move on shortly and take a look at the wider world, if you will. Just looking back on the past year, we highlighted basically that things took a turn for the worse with the Israel-Hamas conflict taking off. But they were quite bad already with the situation between Russia and Ukraine. And not, the issues that stoke the fires, as Vladimir Putin would probably see it, with the likes of Finland, joining up with the rest of the world in their defences. And also, obviously, Sweden not too far away now. Turkey have been holding that off because they're concerned about some of the people that are in Sweden who they class as terrorists. But that looks like it'll go through sometime within the next 6 months.
I think the geopolitics of this are amazing because we're going into a year now where half the world's population, biggest ever year in democracy, will be voting. Some of it is a bit of a joke, like Russia, okay? But that is the truth. And the geopolitics play into Ukraine. So you've currently got Putin, he's got a waiting game with Ukraine. He knows if Trump gets in and if the EU move to the right in their elections, there's going to be huge pressure on Zelensky to negotiate. He will be forced to negotiate because he'll run out of weapons, munition and everything. That is Putin's long-term strategy, wish here, because he thinks Trump will say, I can get you to the table, and if you don't negotiate Zelensky, you're in trouble. Effectively, that's where Putin would like to be. And my guess is you'll end up with a North Korea, South Korea situation where there'll be a permanent ceasefire. That will not be good for democracy. That will not be good for freedom.
There aren't any Russian permanent ceasefires.
Exactly. And you don't trust them.
There aren't. Right? And actually, there's no doubt about that particular election anyway in Russia, is there?
Well, no. But meanwhile, in China, you've got China playing nice to the Europeans, and that's us as well, the Brits as well, because they're concerned about Trump coming in and they want to divide and rule. So they want to play nice to us in anticipation of Trump going back to a sort of economic war with China. And all of that, bear in mind, China is helping Russia in Ukraine effectively, is a really interesting and circumspect view. Throw in one other thing, an election on the 13th of January in Taiwan, where if the pro-independence candidate wins, then right up until the inauguration, he gets inaugurated in May if he wins, you will have China and Taiwan with escalating tensions in Southeast. That will start to affect supply chains. No one wants to see the South China Sea getting blocked off. You could have an economic threat. There are some upsides.
All right, well, we'll talk about those then after the break. Take us all the way down, bring us back up after. BayRadio International, talking to Nick de Bois this afternoon on politics in 2023 and looking ahead to 2024 as well. If we widen the field from UK politics and look a little bit more towards Europe, there have been some quite extraordinary things happening, not least here in Spain with the Catalan separatist deal, the amnesty deal, which has caused quite a lot of consternation.
Well, I'm not surprised if you want to suddenly, people you've been saying are basically lawbreakers, you're now basically saying, oh, you're not anymore, we're going to make you lawmakers. I mean, it's a shambolic deal.
Well, it was in a way to perhaps just keep Pedro Sanchez in power, which
Joe,
is
you're
the way the Conservatives would like to put it, the Partido
do
Popular.
not turn this on the Conservatives, you see.
Well, the PP, that's exactly what they said. He's just trying to stay in
right,
power.
aren't they? I mean, he's done a dodgy deal to keep in power, and he's effectively changed the law. And
It's not gone through yet.
Well, yes, I don't know enough about whether it will or it won't, but he's essentially decided lawbreakers can be lawmakers. Now, that's not a good look wherever you are. It's a grubby little deal, which is what you get in coalition politics, and we don't generally have that. We've had it, obviously, with the Conservatives and
Well,
and the
actually,
Liberals.
we were talking about the 4 times return to power for the Conservatives.
Yeah.
Actually, David Cameron wouldn't have come back that time if it hadn't been for that deal, would he?
Yeah, he probably would have led a minority government, and then I think would have been re-elected. One option to him, and I remember sitting around a table discussing it with him and about 20 others the night, 2 nights after the election. That was the choice. Do you go for a minority government, don't annoy anyone, and then ask for a mandate, or do you actually bring in the Liberals? And that's what he decided.
How much do you make of the rise? We've got Vox in power in a number of autonomous communities, or in a coalition in Spain. We obviously with the situation in the Netherlands, we've got Wilders, and a number of other countries around Europe, which and across the world, in fact, which seem to be moving further to the right.
Well, Vox are really to the right, aren't they?
Yeah.
I think that's probably as far as I'll go. And they underachieved in the election, of course. So what do I make of it? I think you're going to see quite a lot of it in Europe. In the European elections coming up, right across Europe, we've already got right-wing governments. Let's call them like Viktor Orban in there. We saw Poland shift the other way after experimenting with it. But generally, in the EU elections, for members of Parliament, something like all 700 of them are up for grabs in June, I think it is, and they will do well. The right, and we have to be careful about grouping them all the same, because they do reshape themselves. You can see what's happened in France. They've reshaped themselves from National now to a more moderate right.
Marine Le Pen's
party.
looking electable.
Yes, absolutely. As so is indeed the president of the party. I've forgotten his name now. Which, if anything, he may run for president rather than her. So Macron's on the ropes there. Holland, we're already seeing what's actually happening in there. You've got Germany. You're going to see the AfD do well in a lot of the local regional elections.
Certainly in
there.
South Germany.
What are we going to see in Finland? We've got an election coming up for the president in Finland. How much of the right-wing vote will be picked up in Finland, given what's been going on in Russia? It's all very interesting how that's going to develop. But you will see the emergence of the right. That doesn't, by the way, translate into the UK with reform, which many people would say are it's not fair to call them the far right, but they are right of the Conservatives, are currently polling well on somewhere between 9 and 10%, which will take about 30 or 40 Conservative seats.
Lib Dems are still a third party, aren't they?
Yes, they are. But it wouldn't surprise me if reform actually made the leap there. The Tories are getting squeezed by reform on the right, and they're getting squeezed by the Liberal Democrats in the south of England on the left. So they're in deep trouble. But in a nutshell, Europe we're going to see going to the right.
I wonder how much of an effect that might have on the aspirations of Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia for their EU membership. Nothing seems to be able to hold that off at the moment. Whatever is thrown in the way, that seems to be cast aside by the people that are currently in power at the EU.
Yeah, I mean, they're very committed to enlargement, and as the Brits were, by the way, when we were in the EU. We were there because we thought the larger you made it, the less centralised power was, and the
more allies we would have, and therefore the more chance to get things through.
Exactly, and that was the logic. So I think enlargement is on that agenda. But at the moment, what dominates politics in Europe and will dominate the right wing is the question of migration and immigration. It doesn't mean everyone will vote on that, but in an EU election, it's entirely probable people will vote on migration. That is why UKIP won the 2070, I can't remember which year it was now, but they won the European elections in the UK when we were still part of the EU.
Well, we've seen Nigel Farage, in various different guises, not least in the jungle most recently, where he came third. And I wonder what that gives him and his view and his aspirations. But perhaps...
I mean, that was a canny move because he reached a lot of people.
Well, Matt got third as well, didn't he, in the jungle? So Matt
Yeah.
Hancock the year before.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it might be the place where politicians generally come these days. I don't know.
I think they're mad. But the big issue is that this week, the leader of Reform, a chap called Richard Tice, nice bloke, but he's no Nigel Farage. And he's got, clear views. And so he's making a big speech. And the big question that all he'll get asked is Nigel Farage coming back to lead Reform? Because that, again, would transform politics.
Or could we see him back in the Conservative
That
Party?
is the other thing. Now, if I was Nigel Farage, why would you join the Conservatives now? Because it's not a good time to join, and I don't believe it would necessarily ensure that they went to election. What it would ensure is the Tories split. There are people who will have Nigel Farage in the party, and there's a lot of people who would not have him in the party. That is why, after the election, if Nigel Farage goes into the Tories, I guarantee you, for the first time ever, the oldest and longest serving party in politics in Western Europe, which is the Conservatives, will split. Finally, it would split.
You're expecting quite a few of those that have been around for a while to leave anyway, aren't you?
Oh, yeah,
so
lots-
that would
lots-
actually
lots of
that would happen. But do you not think that Farage perhaps has made himself a lot more of a vote winner than he was just by the jungle experience?
He's certainly reached more people. I don't know
Yeah.
if he's more of a vote winner because time will tell. Because he's struggled to win elections. He did win the UKIP elections in the EU, but since then he hasn't.
It was quite effective actually there in Parliament as well.
To be perfectly honest, he's underestimated. I think he should be in the House of Lords because he has changed British politics, whether you like it or not, almost single-handedly. And I believe he's still got a contribution to make, and therefore should be in the Lords, unlike many of these people who buy their way in and so forth. So that is where I think he should go. And I think if he goes in the Conservative Party will split. It will be forever split. You'll have a left-wing government in power for about 20 years. And I just don't see it anyway. You cannot win from a sort of centre-right position alone in this country. The centre of politics has moved in the United Kingdom, but it ain't moved that far. So the Tory splitting just leaves Labour in power for 20 years. They'd be delighted if Nigel Farage rejoined the Conservatives.
I bet they would. All right. What about the United States then? 2024, there is an election.
Yeah, unbelievable. Look, there's a lot of Trump's policies I quite liked. So let me be clear about that. But there is absolutely no way, and this is the big challenge for democracy this year, that if he is elected back to power, you are electing back to power someone who willingly tried to overturn the US Constitution. I don't care what anyone else says. He did nothing to actually cool off the hordes and play down this idea that his election was a fraud and that he should remain as president. I do not believe you can put a man like that in Parliament in the White House or Parliament, but put him in the White House and be confident that in 4 years' time he would not try and seize power. I absolutely am horrified at the prospect of him going back. Having said that, I do like some of his policies, which is really annoying. So where are you, Republicans? Come forward. That's what we're waiting for.
And how soon are we going to see some of these funds let loose for? I mean, it's not just, is it? This was a whole package of funding. The big issue was the border issue in the United States. It was holding up the funding then going to Ukraine and the funding going to
Trump's saying
Israel.
don't
So
pay.
they've gone around the back anyway and got some funding off to Israel in the last couple of days.
They have. But basically Trump is saying America first, that well thought out strategy of isolation that really worked in the 30s. And he's saying America first, so don't give anything to Ukraine. I mean, this is ludicrous. Obviously, that's what we're up against. And Republicans are in fear of their seats if they upset Trump, who is amazingly so far ahead in the polls for the Republicans. It's virtually a done deal. He's going to be the candidate. And if they put Joe Biden up, which is an if, by the way, as the presidential contender, I believe he will beat Joe Biden.
What would be the alternative, Kamala?
Well, I think he'd beat Kamala Harris. I mean,
Really?
yeah, absolutely.
I don't think that would work.
I think the Democrats are in a terrible position. It reminds me of 1968, of which very few of us will remember, the 68 election when Johnson was actually much loved by his Democratic Party, but a guy called Hubert Humphrey tried to stand against him and challenge him, and that actually kind of divided the party. Johnson resigned on ill health grounds, which was rubbish. And I see a similar situation here with Biden being forced to resign maybe in March. And they choose a new candidate. There's no reason it would be Kamala Harris, particularly.
And who would be possibly the new candidate?
I don't know. The Democrats are in such an absolute
I know, that's why I'm
mess.
trying to work out who. But actually, everywhere you look, there's something going on with any of the potential candidates that means that they might not be selected.
And they're making the mistake of they're very fond of Joe Biden, very affectionate of him, and huge public servant. But I think that man, he only won the last American election, remember, narrowly, but he also won it when no one was campaigning. There was COVID. It was safe environment to campaign in. Put that man out on the stump. He will trip over all sorts of things. I think it could kill him as well. I think it'd be unkind to.
Well, it's a heavy toll on somebody.
Of course it is.
To go out on the campaign trail
Absolutely.
like that. And, with his advancing years. Not that I'm saying, but it really is.
Yeah, it is
a difficult thing. Anyway, well, many thanks indeed for your time this afternoon. And I'll look back on 2023 and I'll look ahead to 2024. It's not all good news, is it? Really?
Oh, there's lots to be optimistic about. Let's go for it. We're all here after the worst pandemic we've ever known, and the future could still be brightish.